Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Red Talk Vietnam Series webinar. This is Mabel Gu from Leader Associates, the organizing committee of Renewable Assets Management Vietnam 2020. I feel very honored to host today's webinar. Please note that this will be the last webinar complementing the physical gathering of RAMV conference this October in Ho Chi Minh. Firstly, it's my pleasure to announce that today's webinar is sponsored by Solcast. Formed in early 2016, Solcast is the culmination of several years of work by co-founders James Luffman and Dr. Nick Ingery and their team, who saw tremendous opportunity to approach solar modeling and forecasting from their perspectives as meteorologists working with the electricity sector. Solcast aims to produce data of the highest quality and that is widely available and easy to use. And next, I'd like to introduce the theme of today's webinar, Digital-Enabled Asset Management Strategies in Vietnam. The utility-scale solar PV markets are going steady with the reduction of feed-in tariff and the wave of installations within past few years. As a result, solar farm operation is becoming one of the key issues in Vietnam. Based on experiences from other developing markets, digital analytics can increase yield and lower O&M costs. Please kindly find the agenda of today's webinar on this slide. I'm pleased to have Mr. Vidal Ferdinanzi from CLP Holdings and Dr. Nick Ingery from Solcast speaking at the webinar. Please note that each speaker has 20 minutes for the presentation and the following 10 minutes for Q&A session. We will show a few questions selected from the pre-registers on the slide. If the time allows, 1 or 2 questions from live audiences will be answered by the speaker orally as well. Also, I'm pleased to welcome these industry representatives attending the webinar. In addition to domestic specialists, they're from Europe, China, and the other Southeast Asia regions. And next, I would like to introduce my company, Leader Associates, to all of you. Leader Associates is a leading global renewable energy event organizer. You can see our strong track record and the partnerships across 5 continents from the slide. And finally, we would like to give some tips to our audience. If you have any technical issues, you can use the chat box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any question to speakers, please use the Q&A box next to the chat box. Speakers can answer your question online. And there are 10 minutes will be left for each speaker to orally answer pre-registered questions. And finally, the slides and recordings will be shared by email link within 1 week. Now, let me introduce the first speaker, Mr. Vidal Ferdinanzi, Director, Big Data and AI from CLP Holdings. Mr. Vidal Ferdinanzi has more than 25 years of international experience in consulting firms and the big corporations. Vidal is an expert in digital transformation and strong background and expertise in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics process automation. And his company, the CLP Holdings, founded in Hong Kong in 1901. CLP powers millions of homes and business across Asia-Pacific regions. Their business includes power generation, transformation, and distribution, and electricity and the gas retail activities. As at 30th June 2020, CLP's equity generation capacity that was in operation and under construction stood at 19,304 megawatts. Vidal will speak on CLP's practice of using innovative solutions to maximize solar assets value. Hello, Vidal.
Hello.
Yes. Yes. Could you please share your screen now to start your presentation?
Yes. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hope everyone can see my screen.
Yeah. Yes, we got it. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody from this part of the world. Good morning, good evening, maybe. Just a brief presentation about CLP for those that don't know us. CLP is China Light and Power. It's a company based in Hong Kong with different businesses across Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific.
Hi, Vidal. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Could you put this into full screen? The slides. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, that's good.
So CLP was founded in 1991, listed in Hong Kong before the Second World War, restructured as a CLP holding in 1998. Today, but in 2019, first half revenue was 5.6 billion US dollar with a market capitalization of more than 30 billion US, generating capacity by market, but the equity basis is around 23,000, almost 24,000 megawatts with 4 gigawatts of installed renewable energy capacity. The number of customers is over 5.1 million, including 2.6 around million of people we serve in Hong Kong and 2.5 million in Australia. We operate across Asia Pacific, Hong Kong, mainland China, India, Australia, Southeast Asia, and Taiwan. Our business are very different in different regions. In Hong Kong, we run a vertically integrated, regulated business with operations in the core of Hong Kong. 80% of the electricity is provided by CLP. In mainland China, basically, we entered in the industry in 1979, and we are now one of the largest external independent power producers in mainland China. In India, we operate broad generation portfolio covering coal, gas, and wind and solar energy. Our main renewable assets are located in China and India and in Australia as well. So it's Southeast Asia and Taiwan. We have interest in solar projects in Thailand specifically, and coal-based generation plant in Taiwan, and one of the projects now recently initiated in Vietnam as well. And Australia, we provide gas and electricity to 2.5 million customers, and Southeast Australia and through Energy Australia, we operate in that market in two main businesses. One is the generation, and the other one is in retail. So our business purpose and our growth in strategy is based on harnessing the power of technology, basically distributing the economic value of the energy, delivering completely priced electricity and helping communities to decarbonize, which is basically our main objective in most of the market. We try to enhance the operational performance and responding, of course, to the climate change with a very clear agenda in 2050. We have a very well-detailed roadmap to decarbonize the economy and making efforts to substitute carbon for clean and greener energies. So reinforcing, of course, cyber security, resilience, and data protection, which is part of the challenge of the utility of the future we have in these times, and of course building an agile and inclusive and sustainable workforce. This is basically the key foundations and thoughts that conduct our strategy for the coming 10 years. Energy transition targets, as mentioned before, we have this detailed agenda for the carbon emissions intensity from 2007 to 2015, where we can see clearly our definitely interest in invest more in renewable energy and abandon dirty energies using or decarbonizing our main assets. So this is what is essentially CLP business and what is essentially our strategy. And as mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, we are part of the CLP. I run the Big Data and Artificial Intelligence group. We are 8 people that provide different service to different business units across our business, not only in Hong Kong, but also in other regions we have operations. Talking about solar asset optimization, we have some good experience, very positive experience, using the data and providing some artificial intelligence solutions and algorithms to optimize our business. First of all, I would like to talk about weather forecast. Weather is, as everybody knows, the most important, significant, and relevant factor that impact in our business. So, understanding how weather behave in different regions, and by the way, in Hong Kong and this part of the earth, the weather is very challenging, and sometimes we have to deal with very bad conditions of weather. We have to manage that to protect our assets and so on. But essentially, weather is the most important factor that impact in our business. So knowing the weather behavior is key to optimize our assets. So we have spent and invest important amount of money to understand weather. We collect data, many data from different sources, different observatories, different operators, to understand and predict what is essentially for the renewable assets. Essentially, we need to predict the wind speed, wind direction, which is the most important factor that impact in the wind farm performance and operations. And we have to know very well as well the irradiation and UV rays to understand how our solar assets can be improved in terms of their performance and operation as well. So weather also is not only impacting in our asset and operation, but also impact in the other side of the value chain of the company, which is our customer. So weather is influencing a lot the demand of energy. So we need to understand how weather is changing customer behavior in terms of energy consumption. This is what we do essentially in the next generation of data collection. We try to predict the power generated by solar in different installations. I'm talking not only in big solar farms, but also in rooftop solar. We have also to predict the solar power in order to optimize the full cycle of the energy generation. So solar power predictions is essential, but as I mentioned before, to understand the demand side of the energy is also absolutely relevant to have energy balancing and optimize the overall operation. So we spend a lot of time collecting data and trying to predict the generation side and also the demand side. We have already a short-term load forecasting that we use to predict the demand of energy 24 hours ahead by 15 minutes interval. And we do that every day to facilitate this information to operations and optimize the overall systems in order to be more efficient and to be more resilient, facilitating and providing the energy as our customers expect, with high quality service, resilience, secure, and of course, with all the quality the customers wanted to have. On the generation side, we have also another set of algorithms that facilitate the generation predictions in our solar panels, but also in our wind farms and in rooftop solar installations. We have already these capabilities in CLP. We collect the data with a high resolution frequency. Sometimes we talk about near real time, collecting this data in order to understand what is the capacity of power generation, especially in the very much challenging assets, which are solar and wind, and also the demand of energy as well. So having in place this information is facilitating operations, is facilitating efficiency in our operations, and we can provide better energy with high quality at better prices. Condition-based monitoring is also part of the challenges we have. As mentioned before, the health equipment monitoring and the working condition of our machinery to optimize operations, reduce energy losses, and trying to facilitate to the grid operator the more relevant information and resilience to operate. Because in this part of the world, if we provide this information with more than 10% of the estimation error, we have to pay for that, because it's complicated a lot and it's very complex, the operations, and we need to be very precise in the energy losses and the capability and availability of our assets. So health equipment monitoring refers not only in our solar panels and wind farms and solar farms, but also everything related with the equipment, transmission and distribution lines, as you can see in the presentation, high voltage cable, medium voltage cable and low voltage cables health is also monitored thanks to the sensors we have in our cables and equipment to understand the data, to collect the data, and trying to predict anomalies and potential faults that can be avoided before any impact in our system. In that way, we are more resilient and we can provide a more quality energy to our customers and to the electrical system in general. It allows us otherwise to reduce the energy losses. So most of the equipment in the solar panels is plenty of different devices like inverters and AC and DC cables that are susceptible to be monitored and to control the efficiency and the operations of these devices, and we can provide this information to operators and prevent any potential losses that may happen or unexpected potential energy losses due to malfunctioning of some of the equipments. And finally, which is also very important, is the smart meters monitoring. So we have in our clients in Hong Kong market and in other regions as well, some deployment of smart meters. Still, we have an agenda of deployment that finishes in 2027. Some smart meters deployment that facilitate us to understand two things: how customers consume the energy, what is the household's equipment for the residential segment, but also the smart meters allow us to understand what is the customer needs for the biggest customers in the commercial and industrial segment as well. So using smart meters data, we can collect this information and try to monitor these smart meters in order to prevent potential faults, anomalies, and to make sure that we are billing for the energy we are supplying, that we prevent any faults in the meters as well. But the meters is also the meter collected from the data are also very useful for the energy prediction. So we use the energy data, or the smart meter data, to improve our demand side predictive models. So smart meters is definitely another important part of the full cycle of the energy consumption, from the generation to our customers, that can provide irrelevant data to optimize the whole system. So this is what is our high level understanding of renewable assets. What is at high level as well, how we use the data and how we collect data from different devices, from different sources, in order to optimize the full cycle of the electricity at CLP. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any question you may have regarding this explanation.
Thanks a lot for your excellent presentation, Vidal. Yes, and now to share the questions from the pre-registers.
Yeah.
Yes. We have 5 questions. The first one is, what will happen after the deadline of finance FIT while it's affecting investment strategy?
Well, I think Feed-in Tariff is definitely something that is helping companies and operators to develop new investment in the solar and renewable assets. But I think it's not the most important one. So just in case the Feed-in Tariff is let's say the deadline is coming from Vietnam in this case, I don't think it's going to be impact on the investment strategy of the solar and renewable asset in general. The reason is most of the most of the investment are related with biggest contracts, biggest PPAs. So I don't think it's going to change significantly the investment strategy when the deadline of Vietnam's Feed-in Tariff happen.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is, seeing as COVID-19 is here to stay, what is the new pace forward for renewables?
Well, I think COVID-19 is accelerating urgently the transformation of the companies, and maybe the companies are taking some measures that are maybe replacing a bit the digital transformation journey they were applying and they were conducting. But maybe a kind of replacement happened. But I think for the renewable, I think it's very clear the agenda for all of our companies, and I don't expect changes and deceleration on the new renewable development and the agenda and the renewable journey. I don't expect that COVID-19 is going to impact dramatically or significantly in the renewable journey.
Thank you. And the third question is, could you elaborate on benefit cost analysis about the digitalization in solar farm projects?
Yeah, sure. I'm quite confident on this because, as everybody knows, the solar energy prices has been decreasing for the last few years, and I think the only opportunity to have a positive benefit cost analysis is based on the capacity of the companies to operate very efficiently. And to operate very efficiently, it means we need to know the operations in detail. So the digitalization process and the capacity this process to provide data on real-time basis to operate and optimize operations is critical. So I think definitely the digitalization process is critical for the operations, specifically in the solar farm projects.
Okay, next the question is, what are the cost-effective asset management tools that solar power development can consider in managing their assets?
Well, I think the market is really fragmented in this kind of asset management tools. So we can find many different tools, many different vendors for many different purposes and for many different issues. And I think the best decision is the companies need to understand the market, which is quite challenging because, as mentioned before, is a very fragmented market tools, and it's not easy to have a good knowledge about the whole market. But companies has to do an effort to understand what is the needs they have, and what is the best tool in the market they can use for that particular purposes. But another option, this is the option that we have applied in my organization, it can be built internally as well. So we have been developed an internal team to build these kind of tools in-house. It allows us to customize better the tools we need according to our particular objectives and our particular way we want to operate our assets. So definitely the tools we can find in the market and the capabilities, if we go for that option to create the internal teams to build in-house, are something that the companies has definitely to pay attention in this area.
Thank you. And the final question is the use of artificial intelligence possible in Vietnam now?
Unfortunately, I think never before we have technology at the on hands of everyone, every pocket, and I would say. So artificial intelligence is a well-known technology today. This is something that everyone can have, and as mentioned before, is probably we are living times in terms of the technology acquisition that we never lived before in terms of the accessibility and the prices of that. To be honest, the origin of the artificial intelligence is coming from the open source. So that means that, of course, for Vietnam is absolutely possible, and now is a better and good moment to use it.
Thank you, Vidal. Many thanks for your excellent answering.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now let's welcome the second speaker, Dr. Nick Ingery, CTO from Solcast. Dr. Nick Ingery is the Chief Technology and founder of Solcast, a global solar irradiance and power forecasting data company dedicated to helping you build a solar-powered future. And he will be discussing on how solar data services can enable better asset management. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Mabel. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Are you ready for me to share the screen now?
Yes, of course.
And we should be into full screen.
Yes, that's right.
Great. Thank you so much. And also, I just want to, before I forget it, also acknowledge that we have co-sponsored this session with AccuWeather. And so Solcast and AccuWeather have a partnership that applies to providing some of our enterprise services in Vietnam. So thank you to AccuWeather for co-sponsoring with us. Yes, as I was kindly introduced, I'm here to talk about solar data services, and I want to make it interesting and engaging for you. So let's dive right in. First thing I want to say is that, you know, Solcast is a well-established company. We've got a lot of customers around the world, including some of them here in Southeast Asia area. I'm based in Sydney, Australia. That the company is from Sydney, Australia. And our work's been featured in a number of really high-profile places, and mostly because the way we've approached problems has been very innovative, but also focus on a big mission of trying to help solar grow quickly throughout the world. And we find that many folks find that to be a mission they can identify with because they're part of building that solar-powered future. And I feel that this audience today is very much in that circle of a team working toward a renewable and particularly solar-powered future. Now, one of the things that happens when we operate solar farm facilities in the real world, when we get past that threshold of just planning them and our government target comes out and we start to install a large number of solar facilities, we quickly find ourselves immersed in the real world, and our plans for the future, including our projections for revenue, are impacted by real world environments. And I want to quickly jump in and show you a few examples of how the cloud cover and the reductions in solar irradiance that come with that cloud cover impact Vietnam on a regular basis. And so one of the things that is very common, particularly this time of the year, is convective storms. So thunderstorms that pop up every day. There's very complex interactions between the terrain in Vietnam and its proximity to the ocean. And so you get a lot of sea breeze and mountain type effects that drive cloud cover. And of course, there's a dry and a wet season. And that oversimplifies things, of course. But I want to illustrate this from 3 very recent days in Vietnam with a bit of animated maps that we have on our website for Vietnam. So here we're looking at a heat map of solar irradiance. So bright pinks mean clear suns, and in the darker colors that indicates cloud cover. So this is actually from the 21st of August. I'm just going to let that show one more time. And we can observe that while there is some clearing of the cloud early, very, very quickly, we see the heat of the day come in and create some very dark cloud features there. Those are thunderstorms. So there's one day. Let's look at the day just after it. Some of the things that we'll observe about this is that it's quite similar. We get some really bright, intense sunshine, some cloud clearing, but then suddenly the pickup of that thunderstorm activity and convective storm activity. And following another day after that, we can see this day was a little bit clearer. The southern parts of Vietnam were quite sunny, and the thunderstorm activity wasn't quite as widespread and started a bit later. Now, if you ever want to look at these maps, we keep them up to date. We update them generally about 24 hours after they happen on our website at that URL in the very top. But the main point here is that this type of data that we just looked at, which is a map of solar irradiance that takes into consideration the cloud cover that's being driven by the weather, is a very useful source of data. And we have created an online web interface where you can get this data for your solar farm, for your asset management. And I'm going to talk very briefly about why that is important and how it works. I'm going to show you some examples that relate back to the 3 days we just looked at. And in this platform, we have historical data for developing solar farms, but also real time and also forecasting, short-term forecasting of solar irradiance and PV power output. Now, if we look at an example here from far southeastern Vietnam, a solar farm. This is an actual solar farm. I've just obscured its name to protect confidential details, but this solar farm is 50 megawatts, AC, and 64 megawatts in DC. But that's not the most important thing. It's the location of the farm and then our ability to estimate the power output from that site based on the cloud cover we saw in those maps. So these 3 peaks here are the 3 days that I just showed you. And so we can see there was some, again, fairly clear conditions in the morning parts of the day before dropping off very quickly with cloud cover in the evening, and that the 3rd day was the sunniest one overall. And what's very interesting about this data is not just our ability to estimate how a solar farm should have performed with a given amount of cloud cover, but also how there can be differences from solar farms that are not very far apart from one another. So if we go just about 80 kilometers north of that previous solar farm location, similarly sized solar farm site, a little smaller, we can actually see that the impacts of cloud cover on day 1 were more abrupt. We didn't see any clear sky period at the solar farm on that day, whereas on the 3rd day, there was very little cloud cover impact altogether. And these charts that you're seeing are actually and the previous image you saw here are all parts of the API toolkit. So this solar farm, for example, will be seeing a chart like this that is updating continually and showing the latest information from the last 7 days and looking forward to the next 7 days. And the reason that this type of data is really important really comes down to 2 aspects of asset management. One is visibility, and that means being able to understand how a system is performing over a given period of time and know that that's doing so at its optimal output. But the problem is that cloud cover impacts need to be separated out of the data in order to identify any operational issues. We know that really clear sunny days are a great baseline, but there's even impacts like aerosols and dust that you might not be able to see in the sky that your pyranometer or on-site detection equipment for measuring solar radiation might miss. And also that on-site monitoring can be very costly, and if you don't maintain it correctly, can have significant calibration errors. This is something we've seen many, many times at many solar farms around the world. And so the satellite-based data that we work with, and I'll show you a bit about how we make that coming up, is another source of ground truth for making sure your solar farm is operating appropriately and that you don't lose out on revenue because a solar farm's not performing like it should. And it's hard to tell if you can't remove the cloud cover periods or account for the very thick cloud cover periods we just observed. And of course, there's optimization of an asset, which takes us into some very interesting potential technologies in the future, like energy storage. So we understand that cloud cover is generally driven in a seasonal fashion in Vietnam. That's useful. But understanding how that is likely to happen over the next few days is something we can also look at as well with forecasting technology. And another trend that's becoming very common is that asset managers are being asked to provide solar forecasts to a grid operator and submit a forecast of the power generation, or I should say energy generation at a given site, and what it looks like ahead of time by maybe the next 5 minutes or the next 15 minutes, the next day. It depends on the region, but this concept of self-forecasting is a natural part of the maturing of the solar sector in a given part of the world. And of course, there's really interesting chances to improve asset performance and revenue if there is co-location with energy storage technologies, which maybe we'll have time for an example on later. So there's a real interesting question here that we like to focus on because there's many things that asset managers have to worry about. Where can asset managers quickly, easily, and affordably access cloud cover and irradiance data so that they can do those performance assessments or have their O&M provider do them? Well, this is where we came up with this API toolkit to make this data very easy to get to. So how this works is we have a network of 5 weather satellites around the world where we're getting new images of their cloud cover every 5 to 15 minutes. In the case of most of the Asian region and Australia, we use the Himawari 8 satellite. And this is the one that would apply to Vietnam. This gives us a new image of clouds every 10 minutes. And what our company does is we actually take these raw satellite images, which are really just pictures, and we actually are able to take apart, decompose them so that we can detect clouds and characterize those clouds. And we can build a history of how much solar radiation has made it through those clouds, reaching back into the past. But we can also do this in real time, which is quite exciting, and begin to also create some forecasting. So one of the things that we can do, and we do this in real time, is we grab that satellite imagery. Every time it comes in, we characterize those clouds, and we use information about where the winds are blowing in the upper troposphere, the lower part of the atmosphere, and figure out where those clouds are going to go next. And this means that there's actually operationally serviced cloud cover data over not just Vietnam, but all of the world that we update very, very continually. And this is an example of the actual observed cloud cover on the left versus some forecasting from an ensemble of forecasting on the right that's looking at every 10 minutes, what's going to happen in the next few hours every 10 minutes. So it's a very high resolution of data, and it's very comprehensive. And so once again, the most important thing to catch on this part of the map is that every 10 minutes, we're creating a new forecast, and we're also estimating the availability of solar irradiance over every location in Vietnam. And that's available for the use of solar farm asset managers. And so we have done multiple validations. We've had third-party validations. It's important to really understand that Solcast has an advantage against other folks who have been in the market for longer, because we've approached cloud modeling as meteorologists, and we model clouds as they actually are in the atmosphere. We have some very, very good radiation models that we operate, including some that I developed in my own PhD several years ago. And we track and regularly update our estimates of the aerosols in the atmosphere, accounting for dust, smoke, organic aerosols, sea spray, and those can have a fairly significant impact, particularly in our experience with the Australian bushfires late last year. So we know that we have really high quality data, and it's important to make sure we can back that up by making it easy for you to download and check for yourself. So one of the most important things I want to point out in this is that solar data services are really important for asset managers, and it's also fundamentally important that they be easy to get, affordable to acquire, and something you could try out for free. So that's what we do with the Solcast API Toolkit. Not only the things I've just described before, but we can actually provide you with historical data from anywhere in the world in the format you require for solar farm development. And we have an API, hence the API in Toolkit, application programming interface, a way for you to interact programmatically with software and grab this data continually, so you always have the latest and greatest of the cloud covered data. So briefly, one of the things that I want to do before we move on to question time is talk about a case study. So this is something that happens in many countries around the world, as I discussed earlier, and is becoming more common. It's the need to have real-time and forecast data for a utility-scale solar farm. And so basically, if we walk through this challenge at a very high level that's representative of most cases, you have a need for predictions of solar irradiance or PV power forecasts. So some people will take the solar irradiance and model the PV power output themselves, or they will ask a company like Solcast to do that. And this will be needed to bid into the local energy market or to satisfy requirements from a grid operator. In Australia, we do a 5-minute ahead short-term forecast for our energy market, as an example. In places like India, there's 15-minute interval forecasts. And also it becomes important for executing energy storage strategies. So if you understand how much solar energy will be generated from an asset, and there's also co-located battery storage, for example, it becomes important to try to optimize the behavior of both those systems. And one example of that is charging with the sunshine when cost is low in a market. Vietnam's market's not quite there yet, but it will mature in that direction in the future. I'm very confident of it. So how would we use these solar forecasts? to inform the local utility so that they can maintain supply and demand balance, to orchestrate energy storage, or to calculate penalties in some cases. So what we can do in the API toolkit is it's very, very simple. Once you create a free account, there's nothing needed to sign up. We can add a utility scale solar farm site. So the one that we're creating now is from a presentation I gave in San Diego late last year when we were all able to travel and enjoying ourselves much more than we are now. And it's creating a utility scale site right in San Diego. We can put it anywhere we want, and specifying the AC capacity and the DC capacity into the power model. Increasingly, we're seeing higher DC values over AC values to flatten out the curve in the day. We can also set an azimuth and tilt for a fixed system, or if we have tracking, we can select multiple different types of trackers. It's important to note when the system was installed because we do some automated calculations for degradation of panels over time. And for a big solar farm, we recommend starting off efficiency at 100 and using some of our other technologies to improve the power output forecasting. But you can see as soon as you create a site, you could do this, anyone here could do this for a site in Vietnam, you'll immediately get access to real forecast data and an accuracy assessment of how that solar farm site has behaved over recent time. And in that page, a bit further down below it, we actually move on to explicit examples of how to call the API to get the data you're seeing on the screen delivered into your system. And so this is possible to grab in multiple different formats, time horizons, time resolutions, and for power or irradiance, depending on whichever one you need. And so we also make this really easy to integrate with because it's an API. It has standard documentation, and software developers love us because we've made it so easy to get this data that has typically and historically, and in some cases with many other providers still operating, very difficult or using outdated technology to do so that's not secure. And this is the power system we're dealing with here, so it's important to use modern communications protocols. Now, I have got through my presentation largely to time, and I'm really looking forward to answering some of the audience questions. So I think we can move on to that from here. Mabel, thank you.
Yes, thank you for the great presentation, Nick. And yes, I'm going to share the questions from the pre-registers. Yes, the next slide is about questions. The first question is what types of weather and solar data are considered in the development, commission, and operations of large-scale solar projects?
I really like this question actually because it follows the progression of a solar farm's development and operations. So in development, we want to see very coarse data at first, just to figure out where the best sites are, to make some quick calculations on our projected revenue. And as we move forward with that into financing a site, for example, we want higher quality data. We might want several scenarios of what are known as typical meteorological year files or TMY files. So what we target at that audience is the ability to see monthly averages in the API toolkit, to download time series of data, so the actual estimate that you would see on those charts, for example, that we looked at earlier, or those TMY files in multiple scenarios. As you move forward to commissioning, you really want to do a sanity check. You want to be able to know, based on the amount of solar irradiance, did that solar farm perform as it's supposed to, and we can accept handover from the EPC as one example. And then moving forward, operation, that's where we get into the asset optimization and the forecasting that we already discussed. So I won't go into any more detail there.
Thanks for the answer. And now we got to the second question is, can Solcast data contribute to project bankability?
Yes, absolutely. So the way that bankability works is really the confidence in a data and the accepted nature of a data source. So what you need to do is create models on either side, the developer, the independent engineer checking them, and they need to agree on those models to establish consensus on the terms for financing or purchasing a project. And so really the credibility there sits with those parties that are on either side, the developers or the engineers who are checking the guesses. And on both sides, we have a significant adoption of Solcast data. So it is 100% absolutely bankable. And you can explore samples of that data for free in the toolkit if you're interested.
Okay, next question is, what is Solcast experiment with forecasting for distributed energy in microgrids?
Yeah, they're two very different things actually. So distributed energy is most certainly our most experienced area, I should say. We have done, I think it's something on the order of 12 gigawatts of rooftop solar in operations just in Australia alone. So this is modeling rooftop solar systems and forecasting their power output moving forward. And the ability to model rooftop solar systems power output and forecast it and then provide that back to either an energy market or a utility based on the area of interest that they have is something we do in our grid aggregations product. And that uses all the same technology you saw before for the cloud tracking and forecasting. It just links it up with many tens to hundreds or sometimes millions of rooftop solar systems and puts them all into one forecast, or puts them into a few dozen forecasts for the energy market, depending on what it needs. Now, microgrids are actually on the other side, and Australia is actually very unique in this sense because there's many microgrids. And one of the places that our technology is increasingly being used is in the Northern Territory of Australia, where there are many remote grids, effectively same thing as a microgrid, except a bit more specific in the terminology. And they will use very rapid updating forecasts from us, as high resolution as every minute, so that they're able to balance with other sources of energy, like diesel generators even, which are fairly slow to adapt, and sometimes batteries. So it's a very exciting area at the moment, really.
Okay, thanks for answering. And I think the next question is also about the small-scale PV assets. And as you mentioned about the rooftop system, do you have anything add on this application of a rooftop solar system?
Yes, so we actually provide a tool on our website where homeowners can get a free solar forecast for their own solar system. So in the API toolkit, they can get a special account and get a regularly updating forecast for their rooftop solar system. And we have many hobbyists who do that. But we can also provide a single point forecast, just the same thing as all the other technology, for a large rooftop solar system for a business, for example, or many groups of them. So it's completely possible to also produce very accurate forecasts for rooftop solar systems, as well as the large-scale solar farms we talked about earlier.
Okay, thanks for the answering. And the next question is, how can Solcast extract value from historical PV data?
There's several examples of this. I think the most convincing one is actually how we use historical measurements from a solar farm to run machine learning on the power model to improve it. So we can capture the impacts of terrain, of degradation, of the individual nature of responding to clouds of a given solar farm, and improve the forecast on the fly, even if that data is sent to us in real time. We can use the PV measurements from a history of a given solar farm to make the PV power forecasting and modeling on our end better. So machine learning makes data like that very valuable.
Thanks. And the final question is, could you show the employment of digital analytics in solar projects integrated with energy storage?
Oh, this is a fun question. That could be an entire presentation by itself. That would be quite fun. So I can't show that because I don't have any slides on that topic. But in Australia, this is happening in a couple different ways where our data is being used. One of them is for large-scale solar and large-scale storage that are co-located. So the Ganawara, so Ganawara WARRA, if anybody could follow that, Ganawara energy storage system and solar farm are receiving and operating with solar forecasts from Solcast. And that has been one area where we've had solar forecasts go into energy storage. And another one is going into distributed energy storage intelligence and helping utilities like South Australia Power Networks in South Australia understand how to use groups of batteries in their network to accommodate solar variability. So that's another good example, but don't have any examples to show you right now, sorry.
Thanks a lot for your Nick and for your excellent answering in the presentation. And too many thanks for our respectful speaker's presentation. And I hope all of the audience can learn a lot from today's webinar. And additionally, I'm delighted to announce that Renewable Assets Management Vietnam 2020, the IAME 2020, will be held on schedule on 15th to 16th October. And the IAMB is the first ever and the only event concentrating on exploring promising business models to management the potentially enormous renewable assets and operations successful cases in Vietnam and across ASEAN. And the last, no worry, the presentation slides and also the webinar recordings will be shared by emailing to each audience on this Friday. And many thanks again for your participation. See you next time.